I've been studying philosophy for over 10 years, and yet, when someone casually asks me, so what is philosophy? Or even worse, why philosophy? I still panic and I have no idea what to reply. So I'm wondering, is it just me? Is philosophy really that complicated? Okay, yes, but only if you try to read Hegel's logic without medical supervision. Or maybe the panic isn't about complexity. Maybe there is something about philosophy that attempts to vanish the moment you try to capture it with a definition. To answer this problem, I want to show you, not just tell you, how to do philosophy. And we are going to do it by diving straight into the mysterious and challenging words of one of the most difficult thinkers of all time, Martin Heidegger. So, before we begin, I thought it would make sense to get an idea of what Heidegger talks about. I made a lot of videos about him on my channel that you can check out to get a bit more deep into his philosophy. Here I want to give you some bullet points just to remind you what are we talking about. So, what is his philosophy about? According to Heidegger, the whole team of Western philosophers until him was wrong, and more specifically, the whole traditional metaphysics, which is the queen of all sciences, as Kant says, or the roots of a tree, as Descartes points out. Why was it wrong? To make it short, because they attempt to understand what is the essence of the things looking at the wrong thing. More specifically, they were all looking for the being or Sein, but they were actually treating with the entities or Seiende. And that's the first big problem, what Heidegger calls the ontological difference. The second big problem is, well, there is no second problem. There is only one fundamental problem, and it is that we forgot what the being is. Of course, Heidegger talks about other important stuff like what is the human being, what is the truth, what is the art and technology, and many others. But truly, everything could be reconnected to this fundamental question: what is the being? Or maybe, formulated in a more existential way, we could say, why is there something rather than nothing? Isn't it wonderful, the simple fact that something is, and that we can somehow experience this happening? So Heidegger's philosophy is a bit like Pascal's gamble on God. If you don't bet on his existence, you will never find him. In the same way, if you don't see or experience somehow what Heidegger is talking about, his philosophy will be an absurdity. But in his defense, if you don't believe in love, how can you fall in love? The text we are going to read is taken from the volume 25 from Heidegger's complete works. In this text, Heidegger attempts a phenomenological interpretation of Kant's critique of pure reason. I know it sounds scary, but it's actually a perfect example of how you do philosophy and phenomenology together, working directly on a text. As a professor, Heidegger worked on many important authors during his lectures and seminars. He used to prepare all his lessons before the beginning of the semester, and then he would just simply read them out loud in front of the students. Maybe it sounds a bit boring, but he must have been extremely charismatic because his lectures were always full of students, a number that today would be impossible even to imagine by any philosophy lecture. While working on an author, he would usually attempt to find the so-called not said by that author, and this not said could be translated as the hidden question of the being. This made his lectures and makes his text today very interesting to read, because we can clearly see that he's not only repeating what an author says, but also doing his own philosophy. Whether we share or not his interpretation is just another problem. To give you a brief context of the text we are going to analyze, here are two important points to keep in mind. The first is that Heidegger is trying to understand why Kant wants to ground metaphysics as a science. And in order to understand that, he wants first to define what is the essence of science. The second point is that while working on his text, we need to keep in mind the core idea of his philosophy that I mentioned previously, namely the ontological difference. This is very complex, but I'll try to make it very simple using some examples. So basically there are two phases of same reality. We have the ontic level and the ontological level. The ontic level is easier to understand because it's the one we deal with in our everyday life. And it has to do with specific entities like things, facts, informations, data, etc. And we could say that it deals with the question, what are the properties of the things? The ontological level is the one that is hidden behind the ontic one, in the sense that it grounds it. Therefore, the ontic level is always based on an ontological one. This level deals with the being as such, and with the question, what does it mean for the things to exist at all? Here's an example to make it easier. Let's begin with physics. On an ontic level, physics studies things like matter, energy, and motion. It measures how objects move, interact, and follow laws of nature. And so far I think it's pretty clear, because that's more or less what we learned all at school. But what is then the ontological presupposition behind it? The ontological level is that physics already assumes that reality is something that can be measured, quantified, and explained through causal laws. In other words, it takes for granted a certain understanding of what it means to be. More specifically, to be an object that can be calculated and predicted. And although we live within this presupposition today, it is something that it's not obvious at all. And therefore it is very important to keep in mind that this is only one very specific way of considering reality. Now let's move to the second example, psychology. If you're willing to do some philosophy, I recommend you to pause the video for a minute and try to think what could be the ontic and ontological level before you see my explanation. So the ontic level. Psychology studies human beings, namely our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors. Basically everything that has to do with us and our mind. Now, what is the ontological presupposition behind it? Psychology already assumes a particular idea of what a human being is. For example, as a subject with an inner mind, or as an organism reacting to stimuli. It takes for granted a certain understanding of human being before it begins its research. A quick observation before we move to the last example. Heidegger is not saying if these ontological presuppositions are bad or good. He's not making a moral statement, he's just simply observing reality and trying to see what is behind it. And that is exactly what phenomenology should be about. Now let's see the last example that I find personally very interesting, technology. On an ontic level, technology deals with creating tools, machines, and systems to solve problems or make life easier. When I was teaching this during one of my philosophy courses and showing exactly this example, one of my students made a very good point. In principle, technology also deals with energy. So what's the difference with physics? The difference is that in physics we stay on a more theoretical level. So we face energy laws, etc. without a specific purpose. While in technology, our goal at the very base is to make our lives easier, simpler, cooler, or whatever you prefer. But there's always a particular use behind it. So the question now is, how do I look at the reality, at nature, if my goal is to make life simpler? What kind of presupposition do I need? The ontological level is, technology already sees the world as a resource, as something that exists to be used, controlled, and optimized. It assumes that to be means to be available for use, what Heidegger later calls standing reserve. To make it a bit more dramatic, based on this idea, we could look today at the waterfall, for example, and see a potential resource for charging our iPhones. If that's a good or bad way to look at nature, I leave this to you. Now let's begin taking into consideration a paragraph where Heidegger introduces the idea of a science. So Heidegger writes, "We begin our observation with a preliminary designation of science as a kind of knowledge. But we do not mean knowledge in the sense of the known, but rather as a knowing comportment. This comportment is not a so-called psychic process in the interior or of a so-called soul. Rather, as human comportment, it is a defined, possible way for humans to be. To inhere in this way of being and knowing means to have a relationship with beings that are knowable or known, such as nature, history, space, or time. This way of beings relate to beings themselves. In fact, it is a comportment which reveals the being to which it is related." Now this is the text, and as you can see at the first glance, it looks kind of mysterious. And this is why we are going to analyze it very slowly, sentence by sentence. Heidegger begins with a definition of science that is so simple it's almost insulting. He says that science is a kind of knowledge. You have to try to catch that specific word. A kind of knowledge. Not knowledge with a capital K. Not the ultimate truth, just a type. The reason why we tend to forget it, or we assume science as a knowledge par excellence, is because it is a kind of knowledge grounded on reason. And since we are living in a paradigm where reason and logic dominate, we tend to assume whatever is reasonable and logic as true. Now, a second observation we could make is about science as knowledge. As Heidegger says, knowledge has to be intended in its verbal form, as knowing. Why do you think it's important to underline this? Because Heidegger wants to address our attention to the dynamic and existential aspect of knowledge. Therefore, knowledge doesn't have to be intended here as a product, a collection of facts, but rather as a way of being active, a mode of human existence. Said in more technical and formal language, Heidegger is shifting from the mere epistemological level, related to the question what is knowledge, to the ontological one, related to the question what kind of being does knowing express. Let's go back to the text. What is science? It is a knowing comportment. Let's focus on the second term, which is very important. The original term that Heidegger uses is verhalten. This term could be split into the preposition ver and the verb halten. Ver implies a direction, a movement away or toward. Halten means to hold. So the literal translation is to hold oneself toward or to hold oneself in relation to something. Now keep this in mind while we move to the next sentence. Heidegger says clearly, this knowing comportment, it is not a psychological process. It doesn't happen inside the mind as an inner event. It is a reaction to the world. It is a mode of existence. So, science is a knowing comportment, or we could say now, an existential holding of ourselves to something. But what does this comportment actually do? Heidegger says it relates to everything around us, nature, history, and time. And this brings us to the hardest but most beautiful point of the text. This comportment reveals the thing it looks at. To understand this, we have to look at the German verb Heidegger uses, which is enthüllen. If we break it down, we have the root hülle, which means covering, or veil, or wrap. And we have the prefix end, which is separative. It means away from or off. So enthüllen literally means to take away the covering, to unveil, to unwrap. The image here is of something that was previously wrapped up or hidden, suddenly being brought out into the open. This is exactly what the Greeks called aletheia, or as we translated, unconcealment. For Heidegger, reality is never simply there, transparent and ready to be seen like a billboard. Truth is a rhythm. It is a dance between hiding and showing. For something to appear, it must first emerge from the hiddenness. So, enthüllen des Verhalten, this revealing comportment, is how the human being stands inside this event. We don't produce the uncovering, but rather we participate in it. Heidegger's insight is that this isn't an aggressive act. We are tearing the veil away. It is a receptive, restrained openness. It is holding oneself back just enough to let the thing show itself. We can see this clearly in two examples. The artist, for example, they don't invent the word, they let something hidden emerge into form. With a friend or a lover, for example, in a real relationship, you unveil the other person by letting them show you who they truly are, rather than forcing your own image onto them. In the following paragraph we read, the revealing comportment toward beings which occasionally surrounds human Dasein is a free possibility of this Dasein. Generally, we give the name existence to the way of being which is peculiar to human Dasein, and to which, moreover, knowing belongs as a free possibility. Humans exist, whereas things in the nature are extant. Accordingly, we conceive knowing as a free possibility of human existence. Let's focus now on the very first sentence of this paragraph. Heidegger writes, the revealing comportment toward beings which occasionally surrounds human Dasein is a free possibility of this Dasein. Now we have to leave behind the word Dasein for a moment. It is one of those famous Heideggerian keywords that people write entire dissertations on. But for right now, it is enough to understand that Dasein is simply the word he uses to understand the human being in a new way. So when he says Dasein, he just means us. We already saw previously that science is a revealing comportment. What is the new information we gain here? That this revealing comportment is our free possibility. We use the words free and possibility in our everyday life, but usually we use them wrong, or at least not in the way Heidegger wants us to. Think about the word free. How do we normally understand it? We usually understand it as the opposite of occupied or busy. You ask, for example, is this seat free? Or are you free tonight? This means that we think of freedom in terms of limitation, specifically the absence of an external obstacle. And what about possibility? In daily life, we use this to mean chance. It comes from the Latin cadere, to fall, like the fall of a dice, for example. It means something might happen or it might not. So, a possibility means basically option. If we read Heidegger literally, using our everyday dictionary, we would translate science, as we've seen a revealing comportment, as an option we choose without being forced. This is not what Heidegger means. But then, what does he mean? In order to understand it, we need to read the next sentence. Generally, we give the name existence to the way of being which is peculiar to human Dasein, and to which, moreover, knowing belongs as a free possibility. Humans exist, whereas things in nature are extant. Heidegger says that knowing is a free possibility of our existence, and this is crucial because we exist while things are extant. This sounds strange. Kant would say a table exists if I can see it or touch it, or better if I can experience it. But Heidegger says no, only human being exists. A table is merely extant, or in German vorhanden. And by the way, extant is a terrible translation. It sounds like something just hasn't been destroyed yet. The German is much more precise, but we will get to that in a second. If free possibility is related to our existence, it has nothing to do with making a choice from a menu. It precedes any choice we make. Therefore, we don't have the possibility, we are the possibility. The German word frei comes from the root free, which implies openness. Therefore, we are free in the sense that we are open, we aren't constrained within a specific definition. And because we are this openness, we can relate to things in two very different ways. This brings us to the famous distinction that Heidegger makes in being and time, between Zuhandenheit and Vorhandenheit. Don't mind too much to this height at the end, because that is just how in German you build a noun out of a word. For example, in English, out of the verb open, you can get the noun openness. So both words, Zuhandenheit and Vorhandenheit, come from the German word Hand, which, as you may guess, means hand. The first one has the prefix zu, which means to or toward, and it implies a certain purpose. And according to Heidegger, this Zuhandenheit is our primary way of encountering the world. We don't just look at things, we use them for a purpose. When you use a hammer, you aren't thinking about its weight or chemical composition. The hammer is integrated into your task. It's zuhanden, namely ready to use. Vorhandenheit, on the other hand, has the prefix vor, which means before or in front of. This implies a separation. The object stands before you. This usually happens when the first mode of interacting with things interrupts for some reason. We could think of the previous example. When you are using the hammer and it suddenly breaks, you stop using it and you start staring at it. You detach. You look at it as an object with properties, not with a purpose. So, when Heidegger says that things are vorhanden, he means that they are determined by a certain theoretical interpretation. Now we can try to answer the question, why is knowing a free possibility of human existence? Because only a being who is not determined, defined, who is not closed within an essence, can be a free, namely an open possibility. A table is closed in its essence. A table cannot step back and analyze itself, but we can. So the human, or Dasein, is not the openness of being for choice, not for a decision, not according to the will, but as a fundamental ontological structure, specifically the place where an encounter with things is possible. So, is philosophy complicated? Yes, but not because it's trying to trick you. It's complicated because it asks us to stop taking our own existence for granted. It forces us to look at a hammer, or a sentence, or a scientific law, and ask, why? Or how? And this is how you do philosophy. Not by memorizing Hegel, but by learning to see the unsaid in the everyday life. Thank you for watching this video. I'm Ivan and this is Empyreon, the Academy of Philosophy and Fine Arts.